Well, welcome everybody to the Here Brotherhood podcast. Today we have Joe Speredon, one of our friends and fellow men that is leading in this men's movement, somebody that we look up to. And we're just grateful to have you today. So thanks for being with us.
Thanks, guys. Happy to be here.
Quite literally, we look up to Joe. And
Quite literally. He's very tall. If you're not watching the video, he's very tall. How tall are you?
6'7".
Gosh.
Yeah.
What a...
Just a few inches on me. Yeah.
What is that like? What's it like being tall?
It's great. I'd love to lie, and an airplane's not so fun.
Oh,
Buying
yeah.
clothes, not so fun. But the rest of the time, it's pretty awesome.
It's an asset. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's been a good thing.
I love it. Well, tell us a little bit about just basic details, where you're from, the basics.
Right. Getting to know you.
Yeah.
I was born and raised in West Valley. Went to Granger High School, the old Granger High School, and served a mission for the LDS Church in southern Brazil for, 2-year period. And came back from that, was married, and been married for about 20 years. And I have 4 teenagers, so 3 boys and a girl, and 13, 15, 17, and 19.
Ooh.
So
Fantastic.
definitely keeps you busy,
Yeah.
And for the past 5 years, I've been pretty heavily focused on men's work and building men's communities, doing a lot of the different events that we do, to support masculine health. And that's been an amazing experience, continuing to be able to support my family, but while simultaneously doing that work. And that's what, brings us together today.
Yeah.
So it's a little bit about me.
Nice.
Yeah.
Could you dive into a little bit of what drew you into this like men's work space?
Yeah. Like many men, it was coming from this place of crisis.
Mm-hmm.
Cliche midlife existential crisis that I was approaching when I was turning 40. And it was right around 2020, which was kind of a crisis time for all of us.
Yeah.
But I just started to reach a point where I had all the things that they said I was supposed to have. I had family, I had a career, I had the house and the things, and I was not okay. And I had a lot of fear and a lot of panic and a lot of anxiety coming up. And really what it was coming down to is I couldn't push that down inside the way that I had been doing for years, whenever I had different emotions and didn't know how to deal with them. And so it started to come out in a lot of sideways, unhealthier ways. And the options that I felt like I had in front of me started to narrow as to how to move forward in life. And it got pretty dark, where didn't really feel like I had a lot of options, and got to a place in a time where I actually thought, for a long time it was, I would never take my own life. I wouldn't do that to my family. And then I got to a point to where that actually started to seem like the best option for them.
Mm-hmm.
And that scared me.
Yeah.
So I was fortunate enough to find this kind of a last-ditch effort, an event, a retreat with an organization called Sacred Sons.
Mm-hmm.
And that was an amazing experience. Just this catalyst in being able to consider options. And it raised my awareness about myself, about other men. And I jumped right into it at that point. It felt so right to have that and to be able to experience that with other brothers.
Love that.
What were the realizations that you had through that experience that sort of set you on this trajectory? Even before that helped you manage what you were carrying at that time, even to the point of suicidal ideation, right? I mean, you were clearly carrying a heavy burden at that point. Like, what was it that helped you break through that, or get a different perspective, or helped you to feel more whole? And then you were on the trajectory of, now I want to keep doing this kind of work, right?
Yeah. So one of the things that I've been working really hard on over the past couple of years, and I know that we're aligned in this, is shifting that culture mentality of we have to wait until we are broken or just inches away from broken before we start talking about stuff. That's what I did. And that's what so many others I noticed doing.
Just stuff it down.
Yeah.
Just suck it up.
Until you can't anymore.
Yeah.
And then it's, I've lost my job, I've lost my family, I've lost my pension, whatever the thing is that gets you to that point. So I went to this event. One of the first things that they did is they lined us up across from each other, and like 3 inches between your face and their face.
You're saying so like 2 lines of men.
Yep.
Okay.
Facing
Exactly.
each other.
Got it. Had to
Just-
visualize that.
Uncomfortably close to this other man.
Yeah.
And because it was 2020, we had literal masks over our faces.
Mhm.
And they started talking about the masks that we wear as men. And what masks do you wear? And I'm thinking about that, and I'm like, this is not going to be fun. I don't want to talk about this. Fortunately, they had the other guy go first. And he took my answer. He said the same things. And I had judgments about these other men that I was there with, because as men, again, we're pretty conditioned to just size each other up figuratively and literally.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And so I, determined who these guys were before I'd ever said a word to them. And then this guy comes to me and he says, well, I wear this mask that I've got it all figured out, that I've got it all together. And I thought, what a coincidence that he had my same answer. And then, so I shared with him the same thing. And then they had the guys rotate down one, and that guy stole my answer. And it started to occur to me, like, I might not be alone in what I'm feeling here. I might not be the only one that's struggling with these same things. I might not be the only one that feels inadequate or feels afraid or feels sad sometimes. And that was this huge realization in that moment. And then fast forward through 2 days of a lot of discomfort, I was still very much in a victim mindset and felt like I was just being acted upon by the world in all these different ways. And this person was doing this to me, and the government was acting this way, and my partner was acting this way, and my boss was this way. And I'm just a victim to everything that's going on. And I go into this other event, this kind of meeting, and a gentleman who's become since a very good friend and mentor has the audacity to say that everything that I'm going through in my life is my fault, that I've created it. And I was like ready to fight him. I was so angry. And I was like, so you're telling me if I come over and punch you in the face right now that you created that? This is why I'd have to look at my life, and I'd have to look at what's brought me here and what I've allowed and what I've done to be at this point. So yeah, in a certain regard, I've created it. And it was really uncomfortable. But realizing that accountability was this opportunity, I had to own it all. I had to own all the garbage. I had to own all the misalignment, all the things that I wasn't liking about my life. Not other people's choices, but what I had done to get there. But then when I did that, again, my options opened up because, well, now I can change because I'm owning my freedom of choice. And if I did these things, then that means I can choose to do something different. And that was another amazing realization that I had in that moment. And I've since spent some time to really understand why I had such an aversion to taking an accountability or responsibility for what I was experiencing in my life at that time. And that's been a big focus of the men's work that I do, is kind of redefining accountability as well.
Ooh, this is just, it's totally resonating with me. That's a big part of one of my turning points was accountability, and somebody calling me out and saying that you have to own up to everything that has happened to you in your life. Not other people's actions, but the way that you chose to use that, whether as a victim or using it for your growth or for your betterment. And even to the point, and this really bothered me at first, but he talked about it generally to the group when I was there. He said, even when there's cases of abuse or mistreatment, he said, those, you didn't deserve that, but you have to take responsibility that is a part of your story and what you do with those things. And for me, that was like, it bugged me at first because I'm like, no, that's abuse is never okay. I didn't understand it at first. And the point was, it's what we choose to do with it. And that, oh man, that all hit me like a ton of bricks. And like you said, it opens it up. It opens up the amount of possibility that you have, because then all of a sudden you get to choose. It's like somebody hands you back the pen in your life and you get to write your own story. And anyway, so I just, that resonates with me, that turn on to that accountability in life.
So you mentioned the definition of accountability. How do you talk about accountability in your groups?
Right. So a really quick example. When I was younger, I stole a candy bar from the store. I was with my dad at the store and I stole a candy bar. And I was caught stealing the candy bar. It was a very, very awkward drive home. But when I got home, the thing that I learned in that moment was my dad was really angry with me. The store was really angry with me. My mom was really sad. And the way that I was raised in religion and culture is God was sad with my choices. And for me to take accountability meant I needed to make everybody else feel better about my choice and feel better about me and essentially earn back everybody else's trust. No one really ever said, hey, why did you steal the candy bar? So I wasn't considering my choices in accountability or why I did the thing that I did. Accountability meant taking accountability for the way you feel about it. And this happens so much in marriages or partnerships or friendships where it says, you're making me angry.
Right.
You're making me sad. And I say, I'm sorry for making you sad. I'll stop making you sad. So now I have control over your emotions. And that's my focus. I'm not going to look at my own actions, but I'm going to look at your emotions about it. And it's really hard because your emotions might change day to day about the things that I do or don't do. So redefining accountability to mean I'm not accountable for your emotions. I still want to be there for those because I care about you, because I love you, because I have, commitment to you in some way. But my accountability is to my choices. And so when I recognize that there's a misalignment in my choices, and I can take accountability for that and consider that, it changes everything. But this is most of what I notice men doing, is somebody says, I feel this way about what you're doing. Okay, well, I'm going to manage the way that you feel.
Right.
And so redefining that has been really helpful for me and for, honestly, everybody around me.
Yeah. No, that's very insightful. It's like, are we living in integrity or not? And that's where accountability lies, as opposed to, am I just trying to appease and manage others' expectations or others' emotions,
right?
Which can be quite a destructive cycle, right? That in and of itself is living out of integrity, or it has the potential to have us be living out of integrity, because we really aren't living from our own values at that point. And that can be a real fast downward spiral in relationships, in authenticity, in all the things that actually give us a sense of meaning and purpose and fulfillment, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
So thank you for articulating that. That was a great example.
Yeah. So I'm interested to know, from this moment of accountability and going to this retreat, between then and when you started, was it Utah Men's Circle that was first? What was that story in between?
Fortunately, because I signed up very last minute for this event, and so last minute that I wasn't able to get a plane ticket, and it was in California. So I had an 11-hour drive there. And then afterwards, I had an 11-hour drive home. And for those 11 hours, I just got to ponder, like, what just happened? And what am I going to do with it? Because that was the last thing that I said in that event is, I don't know how to take this home. And I think most people that have been listening to this have been to enough work retreats and weekend seminars and getaways and events to know that those 3 or 4 days can feel really good. But if you don't have something to come back to, the chances of that sticking are really low. And you see this even with people that will go into like drug rehabilitation. There's some amazing programs out there. But if you go back to the same people that are kind of triggering you into that drug use, it's almost inevitable. But if you can have something to come back to and something that is consistent for you to come back to, then the opportunity and ability to integrate is so different. And so somewhat selfishly, as I was coming back from this, I thought, I need to build something at home because I wasn't aware of anything at home that was happening like that. And so I said, I'm going to just put it out online and gather some men together and let's keep talking. And I had, committed to some leadership trainings and coaching and mentorship and things like that. And I said, I need this consistently. And I started the circle. Now, again, 2020, trying to gather anybody for any reason was kind of an uphill battle. But the first thing that I did, I announced it, put it on my social media, Nobody shows up. I thought maybe everybody's still kind of like gun shy. I'm going to do an online one. No one shows up. Fortunately, I kept doing that. And I kept diving into the work on my own, the books that I was reading, the people that I was talking to. And I just spent about 3 years learning as much as I could, integrating as much as I could, growing and practicing in this work as much as I could. And with Sacred Sons, was able to facilitate and work at retreats all over the world and meeting just thousands of different men, from all different walks of life. And come to find out, yeah, those first 2 guys that I talked to, it's pretty universal stuff. We're all dealing with pretty similar things as men. So that's kind of how I started with the Utah Men's Circle. And about 2 years ago, it really started to kind of break loose where men were starting to come more often. And there was some regularity to that. I was more consistent with it. And I found a couple of brothers that have been really helpful in facilitating some of these events with me as well. So then we've just kind of been rolling from there.
Nice.
Yeah.
I love something that you said, and this I think came from a Here talk that you gave to our community and to yours simultaneously digitally, which was amazing. You talked about part of your mission is to help men reconnect with their hearts. I think that was something like that, and this idea of the embodied masculine. And so those 2 topics to me just really stood out when I was listening to that, and I wanted to just get your take on each of those, and maybe the relationship between them too.
Gladly, yes. The connection back to my own heart, and really, I felt completely disconnected. I felt disconnected from everybody around me, and I felt completely disconnected inside of myself. It's kind of like you got a computer and you just start pulling all the wires out of the back. And you know that it's supposed to work, you know that it has before, but it's not right now. And how do I reconnect things to where it starts moving in a good direction again? And a lot of that was first raising awareness to the fact that there was disconnection, because it's not like it just happens in a moment. It doesn't just happen in a day. It's this gradual process as you have children or have a job or have a spouse, and you start focusing on all these other things. And as men, we have this inclination to self-sacrifice. And it's almost kind of a masochistic self-sacrifice, whereas if I'm not suffering, I must not be doing enough. But that suffering wears at those connections. And so starting to take some time for myself, starting to take some time in brotherhood and in reading and in solitude, which is very different than isolation, I started to reconnect my own heart. And I started to realize the walls that I had put up around it to keep others from hurting me, but it was also keeping anything that was good inside of that away from anybody else as well.
Right.
So then as I started to experience that connection, there's a quote that I've loved since I was little. And it's a 1,000-year-old quote. It pertains more to religion, but it's St. Francis of Assisi. And he says, "Preach the gospel at all times. When necessary, use words." And regardless of your religious beliefs, I feel the very same about masculine health. There's a lot of people out in the world that want to say, this is what you should be doing, and this is how you should be doing it. But if we go out there and we just be it, which is that embodied masculinity, people see that, and they're drawn to that. So whether we're representing a religious belief or a belief in Christ or whatever we might have that, we hold important to us, the people that just be it is so much more than the people that talk a lot about it. And the people that be it, you start to see this proof of concept, which, again, with social media, it's really interesting. The barrier to entry to most things is what I'm willing to put in my Instagram handle and profile header. I'm warrior, shaman, ninja, president of, whatever thing. And I am because I said so.
Right.
But how many people have lived that for years and integrated that? Obviously never to a level of perfection.
Right.
But am I doing that to where people are seeing that and wanting to be around me? So those are those 2 things and how I feel like they're connected to each other as well.
Yeah.
Love that.
So the embodied masculine, then you talked about living it, what do you think are some of the, I don't know if it's principles, attributes of masculinity, and how do we embody that more? How do we like walk that walk and not just talk the talk? Like, curious to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, that's a great question, and obviously something that all of us are continually pursuing.
Yeah.
I've identified 5 places where I really try to focus in on a regular basis. And I have kind of little, taglines with them. The first one is to awaken the primal. And when people hear this, they think, kind of like cold plunges and working out and that type of stuff. And there's something to that.
Sure.
But primal means first. And if we believe that when we were born, that was the first place that we were, then that is what you're wanting to awaken, is kind of that kind of caveman brain. But to me, awakening the primal, if we believe that there's something divine about us, that it's awakening that as well. And many times in the world, that is put to sleep in us, and we're encouraged to forget that we have something divine inside of us. So awaken the primal is an entire process, which it is our physical health, but it's also starting with our connection to a higher power. And when we can start to believe that and feel that again, we start to find some more purpose and clarity as we move forward. The second thing is building wisdom and wizardry, which is the idea that we have the ability to learn and to expand and to grow. And the world as it is right now is, you don't have to learn anything, but you can consume a lot of information. I read 147 books last year. I don't remember anything from any of them, and I didn't integrate any of it, but I read 147. And I listened to 5,000 podcasts, and I listened to 10,000 audiobooks, and spent 40 hours on TikTok every day, every week, just scrolling through reels and stuff. Consume. But are we developing any kind of like wisdom, which is taking the knowledge and applying it, and then specializing in some different things? The third thing is claiming your kingdom. And claiming your kingdom is not about the way a lot of people come to find king, which is my followers and my glory and my power and my, ego. Claiming your kingdom is really about the standard that you hold to yourself and defining who you are, the code of conduct that you have for yourself, and knowing not just what it is, but why you have it. And when you have that for yourself, that you can clearly state that to others. A lot of times when I speak to women about men and healthy masculinity, I say, well, how can I find out, if this guy's ready for that, as if he's being healthy? It's 2 things. 1, does he have male friends? Is he talking to other men? And 2, does he have a code of conduct for himself? Can he tell you who he is and what he's about? And if he can't, he's not really living in that king energy, because king is about first providing the ordering and then being able to provide blessing and, abundance in that space. 4th thing is directing your reality creation. Like I said, in that first moment, really accepting that everything that I had created was mine and that I was accountable for that, and then moving that into the rest of the world. Rather than waking up every morning and thinking, oh my goodness, what is the world going to do to me today? And I hope this person is nice, and I hope the weather is good, and I hope the traffic is good. If everybody else behaves, well, then I have a chance at being happy. Instead of waking up and saying, what do I want to create today? What do I want to do? What do I want to experience? And feeling some empowerment over that. And then the last thing is to embody purpose and passion. And that is to really bring in, again, that divine spark to the things that we do. It's not just about making money. It's not about the amount of followers that we get. It's about having a higher purpose that ties back to that higher power. So for me, those 5 things, I check in with those every day. And am I in alignment there? Is there something that I can make an adjustment in this space? And inevitably, there is. But if I'm checking in with them every day, I don't get too far off course.
Yeah. That's awesome. Is that, you talked about there were some archetypes in those 5. Is that in reference to like king, warrior, magician, lover? Is that sort of a baseline for some of that stuff?
That certainly has been a big part of it. Yeah.
Okay, cool.
So, the wisdom and wizardry is that magician energy.
Yeah.
And being able to embody that. But yeah, I kind of have a standard works of masculine health, and that book is one of them.
Yeah.
Iron John by Robert Bly is one of them. And No More Mr. Nice Guy by Robert Glover is one of them. And those 3 books have done so much for me. And I've learned so much from the books and the authors of those books as I've further studied them.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's absolutely based on those things.
Awesome. Yeah. No, those are very solid foundation, and we get to stand on the shoulders of the work that they've done. And so, yeah, appreciate that.
Absolutely.
Those references. Yeah. And I'll have to dig into some more of that stuff too. It's
Please.
good,
Yeah.
good stuff.
You posted about that book the other day that I have it on my Amazon ready to order it. I need to just do it.
Nice.
There's one thing that you posted about that I remembered as you were talking in the first principle, when going back to the primal, and it reminded me of a post about finding your inner child, which was really interesting timing because I had just gone to a retreat with Mike and had a really powerful experience. I used to think that sounded kind of ridiculous when people are like, you just have to find your inner child. It's like, oh, give me a break. But then, and that was coming out of a place of ignorance for me. But as I started to understand what that truly meant, it changed everything for me. I had one of the most powerful experiences of my life finding the inner child. So I would love to hear your experience with that as well, because that resonated with me, and it was perfect timing for when I was finding my inner child. And sometimes when I say it to the world or on a post or something, sometimes I have that inner critic of people that don't understand it yet, that are like, oh, John is doing this hippie stuff or this whatever. And so I'm just interested in how you found yours and what your relationship has come to be with your inner child and what that even means.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think different people will kind of define it different ways. I resonate with what you're saying there, because I heard a lot of people that would say that, and I would think, well, here's an excuse to be irresponsible.
Yeah.
And that's what they're getting ready to say is, I quit my job because I want to just be with my inner child. And I had a lot of judgment around that. For myself, the inner child was 2 pieces. One, at 39 years old, I realized that a lot of mindset that I had developed as a 7-year-old was still running the ship.
Mm-hmm.
And so 7-year-old little Joey and his thought processes about the world and survival and life was still what kept me going. And being able to kind of visually and in meditative states and in processes where I was supported by other men, being able to kind of sit down with Joey and thank him for what he had done. And he got us pretty dang far for a 7-year-old. But then being able to say, hey, I've got it from here. I'm an adult. I can take care of things here. And I've learned some things about life and how we survive and how we do things. And you can rest now. And part of that rest is you can also start to kind of play again. And having children, I think, is one of the best ways to tap into your own inner child. But I also have some really great brothers that I get way too serious, and I take myself way too seriously, like 99% of the time. But surrounding myself with men who will like tease me sometimes, and we can play games and we can sing, and I can get uncomfortable and do things that I don't normally like doing. It keeps that inner child there and alive. So those 2 things of both kind of releasing him from running the show and then surrounding myself with people that can remind me that he can come out and play once in a while has been really helpful for myself. So yeah, I love it. It's a great question.
So how did you get there? How did you go from feeling like it was, frowning down upon that phrase to getting to the point where you found the inner child? What was the process like for you? If you can remember it that clearly, I guess.
Yeah. So the opportunity to gather with other men, to gather with brothers, is something that a lot of people don't do. And we like to tell ourselves we don't have time. And a lot of times that's true. We're busy. We have, again, families, we have responsibilities, things that we want to do, things that we need to do. And we tell ourselves, I don't have time for friends. I don't have time to go sit with other men and talk about my feelings. Like, come on, really? But what happened for me, again, coming to this point of crisis, is now I didn't have time not to. I couldn't afford to do anything else. I didn't have the capacity to do anything else. I just kind of broke. So then I started to have these experiences where I'd go up and like build fires with men, and we'd sit in the mountains and we'd talk. Or we had different exercises or practices that we do together. Or we'd go do crazy things like get half naked and go sit in 30-degree water, and do those things. And it was all of these different experiences that I got to have that started to wake me back up and started to wake up the part of me that can kind of have fun. And the part of me that I was scared of that I had repressed, the part of me that gets angry or that gets sad or that gets silly, the versions of me that had been kind of repressed in the past because someone says, hey, grow up, stop doing that. So, okay, well, I'm never going to do that again.
Right.
I now have permission to do that again. And as I was hanging around and talking with and connecting in with these other men, that inner child started to wake up. And as I started to, again, study more, listen to different authors and coaches and work with mentors and things like that, they helped me really tap back into that. But it was having connection, it was having friendship, it was having brothers that allowed me to start doing that. It wouldn't have happened on my own. And so it's one of the reasons why brotherhood is so important, because I have blind spots, and that was one of them. I remember the first time somebody said, like, Joe, do you realize that 7-year-old Joey is still running the show? I was like,
Dagger
my
to the
gosh.
heart.
I was sad, and I was like sad for him. And I can like feel him inside, like, yeah, come on, like, give me a break. And I wouldn't have seen that. But I had brothers that were able to help me see that and then help me work through it. Big deal.
Love that.
Yeah.
So powerful.
Transitioning a little bit to the work that you facilitate now, I'd love to hear a little bit about your approach to men's work, to brotherhood, to all the things that we've been talking about. Like, how do you sort of step into that as a leader, and what does it look like, let's say at a typical event or a gathering that you're leading or facilitating? Like, what do you do? How do you engage with the men that show up, and what's the goal? All of that stuff.
Yeah. Great question. I really enjoy physical fitness. I worked in that industry for a number of years. So most of my analogies relate back to something in the fitness industry. The Utah Men's Circle, we meet the first Monday of every month and the third Wednesday of every month. And those meetings are opportunities to come together. We'll get 50, 60, 70 guys. And we've got 2.5 hours.
It's a good sized group.
It's a great sized group.
Yeah.
But we don't have a lot of time to do very much.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like the workout in the park. It's awesome and it's fun and it feels good and you can have a good time, but there's not any consistency to it. So about 2 years ago, I recognized that desire that I had for consistency in brotherhood and connection. I also recognized that I needed something that fit a schedule, because we all have lives. So this gym analogy is, if we could have an online call here and an online call here, and maybe a guided meditation here, and an in-person event, and an online group, and a video messaging group, and all of these different options. It's like people that go to the gym and they say, I really like the treadmill and I really like the free weights, and I want to do those things. Or I really like the Zumba classes, I'm going to go do that. Or I really like the sauna and the pool. Everybody finds their way to experience that health, but it's the consistency that's offered in that. And so very much like what you guys have done and created something that is always there. So it fits the schedule of men, that if they want to go check in and they want to be a part of it, it's there. And then you have other offerings that's like, hey, there's a class at this time that if you want to come be a part of that, please do. But you can constantly dip in and have brotherhood, have connection, have support, have opportunities for learning and for growth and spiritual connection. And when you have something that's consistent over an entire month, then your health, your kind of holistic masculine health, skyrockets. And it helps in business, it helps in your relationships, it helps in your spirituality, just everything. So that's kind of been my approach. I still really love the idea of retreats. Obviously, like that was really important for me. But if that's all we have, it's not creating something that's sustainable.
Yeah.
So that community that you can come home to
Mm-hmm.
and have this brotherhood, like the Algiz Guard, which is the
Mm-hmm.
the kind of offshoot of the men's circle, which is more consistent.
Will you spell that for people listening
Yes.
so that they
It's-
hear it right?
Algiz, Algiz. It's a Nordic rune, and it signifies both safety and significance. The idea of being safe underneath this symbol. It's like a tree or an elk horn, but also it's like arms reaching up to heaven and a connection to the divine. And for me, that is, as we understand our true nature of safety and our true nature of significance, we're then able to start to create that for others around us as well, which I believe is a really necessary part of masculinity, is what we create in containers for others to experience that. But in creating that, the men that are there, like, we know each other. We know each other's names. We know what each other are going through. We talk and connect on deep levels. We're there not just at 3 a.m, but because we have a lot of conversations, those 3 a.m. things start fading away. There's not nearly as much of that because we're talking about stuff on a regular basis.
Yeah.
And that's kind of been the idea for me, is if we can have a brotherhood that is kind of a smaller container and then a repeatable container, it's really what we need. And that's the way that we've evolved as human beings for so long. We were in villages and tribes, and you knew everybody in your tribe. You knew everybody in your village. And we've stepped away from that. I love the idea of having global connection, and we have some amazing resources and technology to do that. But also not just I've got 10,000 Facebook friends,
Right.
but I have 10 friends that would die for me.
Yeah.
And that I would die for them, and I would live for them. I'll take that over 10,000 Facebook friends every day. You know?
Yeah. But those relationships that have such substance and depth.
Yeah.
So how do you cultivate those kinds of relationships? Because I think that's where you can get together with a group of people 5 times a week and only go this deep, you know?
Yeah.
So how do you help facilitate? Because this is something that, you know, we've been able to experience and look at our relationships from the past, and then the relationships we've developed in recent years under the banner of this oath and this, with all this intention and meaning. And it's like, wow, it's such a different kind of connection when you create that container for it.
Absolutely.
So I'd love to hear, like, how do you help facilitate or create a kind of space where people are able to connect at this deeper level, where they become these like soul brothers, you know?
Yeah. Couple things. One, consistency.
Yeah.
So many, for example, podcasts, you know, tens of thousands of podcasts will pop up and somebody gets really excited about it, and then it fades away. It's
After
gone.
3 episodes.
After 3 episodes, maybe. And different groups pop up, different businesses pop up, and people are like, oh, I'm into this. How many TV shows have somebody got invested in and then it gets canceled after the first season, you know?
Yeah.
If I can show up consistently over days and weeks and months and years, brothers know that they can rely on that. And that creates a feeling of safety. Secondly is my willingness, or any leader's willingness, to be vulnerable first.
Yeah.
And I can't tell you how many times we've been in a circle of 50 guys, and one brother will be willing and able to say, hey, I've been struggling with pornography, for example.
Mm-hmm.
And then he gets done talking in a really authentic and vulnerable way. And I say, who else has struggled with pornography? And then, and only after he has shared, does 99.9% of the hands go up. But if there's not that person that's willing to be vulnerable first, that's an important part of creating that container. And then on top of that, maintaining different levels of confidentiality.
Yeah.
And having consistent rules in those containers. And then the nature of what we do, right? If we're going to get together and talk about sports every time, and only sports, it's not going to create a lot of depth.
Yeah.
But when we can, again, talk about real life and real things and finances and relationships and spirituality and physical health and the things that we don't talk about because of the mask, yeah, that's been really crucial. And I'm sure you guys have experienced the very same things.
Yeah.
Oh, it's so interesting to see at either retreats or events, or we do breakout breakout sessions every once in a while on a Zoom call. And, when there's a share session, it's interesting to see what it takes sometimes a few guys to go from surface level to deep. But like you said, it just takes that one. So we usually try to intentionally have somebody from the team in each breakout session to start it off, to kind of to model it and say, to give permission in a way. Like you said, give permission to the rest to say, okay, yeah, I struggle with that too, because it just takes one. And I think something that you hit on is so important for businesses, for families, for anybody that's leading is it has to start from the top. In a business, in a family, if the father or the CEO or any of the leaders are not modeling what masculinity looks like, which is vulnerability, true masculinity, we believe. If they're not showing that true vulnerability, you're not going to see it from your children, from your spouse, from people that work for you. And so I love that example, because we've become very passionate about that it does start from the top. And we've seen that, and we see that in the work that we do, how important it is for the leaders to really lead the way. Absolutely. In vulnerability.
Right.
Oh, so segue from that to, you said you're a father of 4 teenagers and 3 are boys, right? 3 sons. How do you think about fatherhood? How do you think about leading and demonstrating, showing, teaching what healthy masculinity is to your children? And I'm sure this would vary from when they're very young into, adolescence and through the various stages of development that they go through. And I'm very curious your thoughts on how do we model it to our children, our sons?
Yeah, and to our sons and to our daughters, right?
Fair enough.
I want my daughter to see that.
Yeah.
When she starts, she's 17, so she is dating.
Right.
And I want her to have examples of what to compare that to.
Yeah.
But for our sons as well. My children were a little older when I started a lot of this work.
Yeah.
And I spent a lot of years in regret, like, I wish I'd known this, and I wish I'd been better at this. Right. But I think as any parent, that's kind of inevitable.
Sure.
So what I've done is I've been very authentic, and it feels vulnerable. Vulnerability is an important word there, but vulnerability is just where it starts, because once you show the vulnerability and you don't die and you're not banished from the tribe, then you realize that the vulnerability is more of a perception.
Yes.
I feel vulnerable because I feel like somebody can take advantage of this. But when the vulnerability kind of fades away, the authenticity that's left behind that is I just get to be authentic.
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean that I share everything with every single person, but who I am is authentic with the people that I'm with. And so when I'm with my children, I'm authentic about who I am. And I'm authentic about raising them. And I'm authentic about what I do and what I don't do and what I believe in and what I don't believe in. And to your point, being willing to do things like apologize. Hey, I messed up. I lost my temper, and that had nothing to do with you. I had a bad day, and you were the first person that I interacted with. I'm sorry. That's authenticity. It can feel really vulnerable because, man, I feel weak and I feel guilt and I feel shame. And then your kid is like, yeah, okay, I love you. I understand. Modeling those things. And then those 5 points that I spoke to. I want to show up. I want my children to see me going to the gym. I want them to see me making healthy choices in every regard. I want them to see me studying, learning. I want them to know that I'm engaged with them. I want them to know my code of conduct. They know exactly what they can expect from me as their father because I've shared with them exactly what my code of conduct is. And I've given them permission to say, and it gets annoying sometimes because they do, but like, Dad, what you just did or said doesn't really match with what I think. Yeah, you're right. But
that's
man,
amazing.
They have it. And there's lots of times where they'll kind of tease me about some of that stuff, but in the best ways.
Yeah.
Because we've shifted so much of that culture. And very rarely will you hear one of them say, you're making me angry. They'll say, hey, I'm really angry. And what you're doing is bringing up a lot of these feelings for me. It's so different. Then I get to say, Tell me about it. But rather than disempowering them, you know, my daughter was little and she'd come home from school, for example. I had a bad day. This cute little 8-year-old blonde girl, blue eyes. Well, let's sit you down in front of the TV and here's some ice cream and I'm going to turn on a show and you don't have to feel any of that. And I thought that was like great parenting, you know. But now comes home and I had a bad day. Tell me about it. Let's talk. And creating those opportunities for connection. So yeah, it is absolutely a holistic practice in the way that we interact with them, but it keeps me on my toes.
Yeah.
And that's one of my main motivators for staying and maintaining some level of healthy masculinity, is so that I can model that.
I feel like parenting is it's such an opportunity for growth, because our kids, like, they are little mirrors and they reflect back to us. And I think the times I get most frustrated with my own kids is if I see an attribute or something about myself that I don't like and I see them living it or you know, showing it back to me, reflecting it back to me. And that's usually when I'm like, oh, that's when I make my biggest mistakes as a parent, because I just get so angry or frustrated or annoyed or whatever it is. But then, you know, to be able to repair, like you demonstrated for us, like to acknowledge, like, hey, I just messed up, right? Like, and to apologize, there's such power in that. And I feel like that's huge in and of itself. But on that topic of, like, do you feel those same kinds of triggers with your kids? And if you do, or when you do, how do you sort of manage that? Because I would love to get to the point where instead of reacting and then having to repair and apologize, I can acknowledge it in the moment and then respond as opposed to react. And I think that's you know, we're all working on training ourselves to improve in those ways. But curious if you have thoughts on that.
Yeah. That's, again, it's a culture shift, and it's something that just happens with consistent effort. Same thing if you were raised in a home where cursing wasn't allowed, and then you go somewhere and someone curses, you hear that immediately.
Yeah.
You recognize that. If you go somewhere and they all speak English and then someone starts speaking Spanish, you hear that. You recognize it. And it's because you've acclimated to a certain way of doing things, and then you see it done in a different way. So we've basically just had to shift the language that we speak in our home.
Mm-hmm.
And for myself, it's the same thing. Because I continue to strive to do more of my own inner work and better understand myself, I can catch myself more often than not now, whereas 5 years ago, that was just not the case.
Yeah.
And it absolutely is a practice. But as I do that, things get so much better. And then as I modeled that, because I've put in the time and put in the effort, well, now they're being raised with it.
Yeah.
And that is something that they get used to. So then they go to one of their friends' house and they see, in some ways, some misalignments that I used to exhibit more often.
Sure.
And it's very apparent to them because they're not experiencing that on a regular basis now. And again, in no way does this mean that I'm doing things perfectly or even as consistently as I would love to think that I do. But it has gotten a lot better.
Yeah.
And because we keep doing the work.
Right.
Because we keep showing up. And that's why those 3-day events, again, awesome. But if that's all you're doing, it's never going to yield that result.
That consistency.
Yeah.
So you talked about this code of conduct too, and I'm curious about this because a few years ago, my wife and I developed what we call our family crest and purpose. And there was a whole story to that and how it came to be, but we identified as a family, and this is something we have on our wall and our kids see it. What are our family's core values? And we just have them listed off. What are our guiding principles? And we have, you know, a bunch of those, just like these words of wisdom that we want to live by and embody. And then we have our purpose statement, like what's our purpose as a family? And so we did that first as a unit, like as a whole family unit. And then my wife and I have done that individually. So what's my individual set of core values? And of course, there's overlap between these things. But then there's some places where there's not overlap, and that's perfect, right? That's how it's supposed to be. So I feel like I have sort of a version of something of what you're describing, and I'm curious to hear about how you identified your code of conduct and if you're willing to share some of those principles.
Absolutely. For many people that have been raised in a religious environment, Christianity or otherwise, oftentimes we'll take the rules of that religion and adopt that as our code of conduct.
Yeah.
And that isn't bad. It really isn't.
Because you don't want to misalign with those values.
Right.
Because then it doesn't feel true or like you're being truthful to your faith or
Exactly. So having those there can be really valuable. Where that can cause issues, and where it caused issues for me, is I was raised with certain core values and I never stopped to think about why. And so, for example, in the LDS faith, which I was raised in, part of, you don't drink alcohol.
Mm-hmm.
So then what happens when someone maybe steps away from the LDS faith and the only reason that they weren't drinking was because I can't? Well, I've seen it happen time and time again where now I'm going to just go kind of crazy and come to find out there's some pretty good reasons for the not drinking, especially to, certain levels.
Mm-hmm.
And I know people that have lost their families and lost their jobs and lost their home because they go into those things. So all this to say, religious codes of conduct are not bad if you understand your why. If my reason why I go to church every Sunday is because I want people to see that I go to church every Sunday, that's not sustainable, nor is it going to yield the result, that we hope that it will.
Right.
So when we can align with the proper why, then our core values, whether they come from a religious environment or a family, they become much more sustainable. So for myself, one of the things that I started doing is I started asking myself, why do I do what I do? And it was really difficult. Kids are really good at this too. I got to go to work. Why? Well, because we need to make money. Why? Because things cost money. Why? And, after like 5 questions, you're down to some pretty deep topics. But I started to do that with myself.
Mm-hmm.
Why do I go to the gym? And at first it was vanity, not sustainable. But if I value my physical health and my ability to provide for my family, that's a different why.
Yeah.
And that became one of my core values is I value my physical health and I know why I do that. So now when it's, I got to go to the gym. No, I get to because I know my reason why I'm doing that.
Yeah.
And that's, again, I'm not so interested in brotherhood as telling men, this is what should be important to you. And this is how you should be living your life. But you better know your why. And if you don't, you're setting yourself up for a lot of pain down the line. And for every one of us, that goes down to this idea that what I say is important to me and what I do, there is always space between those things for everyone.
Yeah.
So if I say that my physical health is really important and I go to Taco Bell 4 times a week and eat 10,000 calories, there's dissonance there. And I need to be able to look at that. But I can only look at it if I have awareness about what I'm saying is important. So, yeah, I have a list of 10 items. My physical health, being important is one of those. Another one is I'm not going to play small. For a long time, I played small and I called it humility. And I was very self-deprecating and wanted to make sure that everybody knew that I was inferior to them in capacity and in intelligence in all these ways, because I didn't want other people to feel uncomfortable. But I realized that I was doing myself and others a disservice by that. So that was another shift that I made. And because I read my code of conduct every day, am I doing this? And again, I make these small shifts that don't get me way far off course when you don't look at that for 38 years. And that's where I got that, in that first time. So I love that you guys have that and that you've developed that for your family and for yourselves, because that is exactly what it needs to be. And you think about that when you enter a business partnership. Hey, here's who I am. I can tell you exactly who that is and who you're going to get. And it's never going to be this do as I say, but not as I do type thing. If I'm a parent and I'm showing up for my children, they come into my life, or if I'm dating somebody and I want to invite them into my life and say, if you want to be my partner, this is how I operate. Do you want to come into it? Great. But there's no surprises coming in that all of a sudden, surprise, I'm this different person. Yeah. I get to be very clear about who that is. That's an empowering tool, an asset to have for yourself and for those that you interact with.
Yeah.
Cool. It saves a lot of time for guesswork as you enter into a business relationship or just any relationship. It's here's who I am, and you don't have to guess.
Yep.
Because here it is.
Exactly.
I love that.
I love that you got to the deep layers of purpose or of meaning, the whys. Like you talked about at the beginning with your story of, I had checked off all these things, right? I had a family, I had a job, whatever else you had, right? And sometimes that's as far as many of us get in understanding the purpose of our lives. It's, I've been shown a certain model, and I've been told by all these different authority figures in my life or culture or whatever it is, that if I achieve X, Y, and Z, then I made it and I'm good. And then you see time and time again, people get to that stage where they've, air quotes, made it. And maybe this is a midlife correlation here too, because it often takes to about midlife to achieve all those things. And so you've checked all those boxes, and then you're going, okay, I did all these things and I don't know why. Truly, it's like I checked those off because I thought that's what I was supposed to do, or I thought that's where I would find fulfillment and meaning and purpose in life. And then you realize, like, I didn't know the why behind any of those, right? And that's where I think some of the soul-searching work begins for many of us. And that partially autobiographical for me too, right? Is like, okay, I mean, I had an incredible life set up at one stage in my life a few years ago, felt totally just blessed and in this great situation. And yet I was like, why am I struggling day in and day out, feeling like my life has meaning and purpose right now? And that actually compounded the feeling of guilt around it, because I felt like I shouldn't even be feeling this because I've got this great family. I've got all these, great things, but I was disconnected from the heart, as you mentioned. I was disconnected from knowing really the purpose. And not just knowing it, but feeling it, like feeling the fulfillment in it. And I think that's another point of disconnect, is we can get so in our heads, so cerebral about our lives and why we're here and what we're doing, that we lose that connection to the heart, to that space of where we really feel fulfillment. And just breaking through that barrier that sometimes we create from maybe the neck down, can we penetrate that and break through and feel a deeper sense of connection to that divine that you talked about, which I thought was so interesting. You talked about that being primal, because I often think primal is the natural man, and then you have the divine, and they're maybe in conflict with each other. But I think it's a beautiful concept to think about the integration and the body and the physical and the spirit and the divine all being inseparably connected at some point, right? But that's where we can find a fullness of joy, is in that embodiment. I think it's a beautiful concept, and it's something that I've come to learn more about as well. But yeah, I think that coming to that purpose, I think, is where a lot of us are missing that sense of fulfillment. And that's one of the things that this community, the Brotherhood, and not just the Here Brotherhood, but all of the work that's happening. I've been to other retreats as well. I went to a Mankind Project retreat. I've met people like you who have done other experiences and are leading brotherhoods. And I love that there is just this sense of openness and collaboration. Like, we're not in competition with each other. The first retreat I went to was the Evolution Project by Brian Hurd, and Louis Hamner was there, and he led breath work at that session. And Brian knew that I was thinking of doing this work, and instead of being afraid of that, he said, come and experience it, and then I'd love to see what you come up with. Like, I'd love to see what you're going to do. And then he came to one of my first retreats that I held a little while after. And so there's just this beautiful collaborative spirit in this realm, which I just love. So anyway, we were talking about purpose. So somehow I got on that tangent. Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to add on to that. That's been, and I know we're about out of time, but one of the most surprising things about being in this space, because you said at the beginning that a lot of times men will, size each other up, or there's always, who's the alpha in the room, or and it's all this stuff that is
ego,
right?
Competitive, yeah.
But I remember the first time we met you, I was actually intimidated because I didn't know you. And I'd only seen pictures and things, and there's these assumptions because of, your large stature and all those things. But I met you, and that all went away in about 20 seconds. But after that, part of why that went away was, you said, we talked about collaboration and why it's so important amongst all of these men's communities. And you said, even if we took, if we were within 15 square miles of where we are now, and we all devoted all of our life to just the men within this area, we still would have a lifetime ahead of us, and we wouldn't be able to reach even a small portion of them. And so that really was helpful for me at the beginning of building Here Brotherhood was to look at, you and Jimmy Rex and other men who are just on the same wavelength of, listen, let's all work together.
Yeah.
Let's do this together. Let's find as many men as we possibly can and try and help them to do the inner work. And so I appreciate that about you. I want to honor you for the work that you've done in your life and for all of the men and families that you've been able to help. So I just want to honor you and say thank you for being on with us. We have about 30 seconds. Right. Do you have any parting words, or we have a lot of listeners that care about mental health and men's mental health and brotherhood and all these things. What would be your advice or your parting words for those listening?
And together we rise. It does not have to be this idea that has driven so much of the world for so many years, is it's us against them, it's you against me, it's one against another. When we stop thinking about that and we start thinking about just becoming the best version of ourselves, that is the challenge. That is the battle. That is the warrior spirit, is to become the best version of myself rather than having to defeat you or you. And that is the work. And I'm excited to be moving forward in that with you guys. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Joe. Appreciate you coming on.
It's a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.